Hello, I'm Susan King. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm happy to welcome David Kansas, who is COO of one of the organizations that makes my heart cheer, American Public Radio, one of the great, really, providers of product and great programming on our really, I think, great American resource, public radio.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. And this is a whole new world for you. Describe a little bit about what you do, because we're going to go into, you're a newsman back when newsmen were called newsmen, not just news gatherers, but you're now an executive and somebody who's organizing public radio. What's that take?
Well, it's a complicated and eclectic assignment that I've gotten. I started in radio, believe it or not, many years ago while I was in college. I worked at NBC Radio Network News, so it's a little bit of a return to the past, if you will. And at American Public Media, we run a number of different operations. We have a news operation in the upper Midwest. We have a news operation in Los Angeles. We have national news programming like Marketplace, which is the leading business program for public radio heard across the country.
And it's has really great airtime here in North Carolina.
Yeah, which is great. It's a great popular show. It's actually, believe it or not, based in Los Angeles. I'm based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, Minneapolis and St. Paul. We also have a lot of cultural programming, classical music. We have a classical music network in Florida, in the upper Midwest. We do national classical programming. And a little secret of mine is, even though I'm a hard-bitten newsman, I do love classical music and have sung in classical choirs my whole adult life, mostly in New York. And so to have the two together has been a real joy, kind of a surprising combination.
So are you the business guy as to think about whether it's all going to add up financially, or are you sort of the one thinking about the eclecticness of the American public's tastes?
A little bit of both. Actually, my job is the Chief Operating Officer, so in that role, I've got to make sure that the finances add up, that the business strategies are moving in the right direction, but I also hold the hat of head of content. So I'm working with the news leaders of our various news operations to ensure that they're doing great news and that they're operating at the highest levels, and also thinking about our cultural programming to make sure that that's appealing to American tastes. And interwoven throughout all of that are all the technology challenges and disruptions that have affected all kinds of media, radio included. And so it's a interesting job. I joke that it ranges from Brainerd, which is a small resort town in Minnesota, to the BBC in London. We're the exclusive U.S. partner to the BBC World Service. So it's a wide range of things, from small towns to big cities across the country.
And it grew out of Minnesota Public Radio, didn't it?
That's right. It was Minnesota Public Radio. It started about more than 45 years ago. It's a small station in a college town north of Minneapolis. And it has since grown into this network of different programs and stations. We have more than 50 stations in 12 states, along with national programming. And probably one of the biggest things we're known for is Prairie Home Companion.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that, and you still have it, because there was this little rough time with Prairie Home Companion.
I've been there 2 years, but there was a period where Garrison Keillor wanted to take a little break. It was several years ago. He's still going strong. Next year will be the 40th anniversary season. And it's one of the fascinating and complicated aspects of public radio. It's a bit Byzantine. There are three major organizations: National Public Radio, American Public Media, and Public Radio International. Those last two are both in the Twin Cities. Both have Minnesota roots, and both serve the public radio community across the country.
And so in this changing economic world, and what I loved is you started by saying you think about where the money is, because people used to think, oh, public radio, we don't have to worry about money, we just do the great things you hear. But there are three of them. So people might say, gee, how can the world be able to survive with three? And others will say, well, that keeps the competition and keeps people fresh. How do you look at the fact that we now have three different really competitive companies out there that are really starting new programming and creating new opportunities for young folks?
Well, the three entities I described are involved in national programming, National Public Radio, ourselves, PRI, and I think it's good to have some competition for different national programs. There are dominant players. For instance, National Public Radio, Morning Edition, and All Things Considered are staples across the whole country. People can't really do without those. PRI is doing sometimes more eclectic things like Studio 360 or This American Life, and we're kind of in between. We've got Marketplace, which is a very strong national brand, and we've also got The Splendid Table, which is a lovely, entertaining food program. And for a long time, we were partnered with the University of North Carolina, or WNC rather, which has the initials of University of North Carolina, on a show called The Story, which is coming to a close, and that was a great partnership and provided more great news around the country. So it's good. It's a good level of competition. The issue for the system is really how strong those local stations can be. That's really where the rubber hits the road. The federal funding is directed to those stations, and how they use those resources play a big role in the health of the entire system.
Well, I must say, I'm an advisor to WUNC Radio, so we will have another program for you to compete for, because
look forward to that.
Yeah, it's I think, like Minnesota, I think North Carolina has a very proud system. I've seen a lot of them, and I think we're good.
You are.
But I want to look back now, because I also will have students watching this. They'll say, okay, so he's a radio guy. Yeah, you stayed in radio. But you became really a financial journalist and did both new startups, The Street, but we're at the, let's say, the pinnacle of financial news reporting, the Wall Street Journal, for many years. So how did you craft your career? When did you decide business journalism was it for you?
Well, like most business journalists, especially financial journalists, I'm a failed sports writer, which is how most of us got started. So I got started covering things like the Columbia football team, which lost 44 games in a row while I was covering them. So it taught me a lot how to deal with pain and loss. So the sports writing thing didn't go where I wanted it to go, so I got into business journalism at the Wall Street Journal as a very young, fresh out of college student and a professional. And I'd always been told that the Wall Street Journal rewarded hard work, that they would promote from within, that if you really put that nose to the grindstone, that you could build success there. And so I chose to go there because I thought the opportunity would be great. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about finance. So I had to teach myself a great deal while there on the job. I started as a proofreader.
What year was this?
It was 1991. I started as a proofreader on a production desk. And by 1996, when I left after my first of 3 stints, I was covering the stock market for the Wall Street Journal, which was a great, fun job.
Now, would you recommend that to students still? Start at the bottom and work your way to the top, or do you think they need to have a stripe on their shirt to understand annual reports and financial statements and a few things like that? We have to have a good business program, I'll tell you.
I certainly would have benefited if I knew how to read those things right from the beginning. But I believe pretty strongly that if there's an organization that you really want to work for, that you have, for whatever reason, developed a strong passion or desire for that organization, getting your foot in the door, as opposed to waiting for the exact right moment, is a good idea, especially if you're younger, where you can get there and be in front of people. What I did is I was a proofreader, but I was in the building. So I could go to editors and pitch story ideas. I could have all this great content that other people were calling in, trying to get before email, so you couldn't email your proposals. So to be able to walk across and have a story idea accepted or usually rejected was a great way to build your visibility internally. And I think those opportunities are still there. I mean, the demands for information and news are higher than ever. And if you get your foot in the door and want to work hard, I think you can figure a way to move up in the system.
Yeah, I think that's always important to realize, personal kind of perseverance is a skill that's nurtured, not just taught.
Yeah, I mean, I worked the swing shift from 4 to midnight, and so I looked at that as I could be in the office at 9, pitching stories from 9 to 4, so I didn't have a very big social life, but it all worked out.
So what made you give that up to go in the startup, which it was when you went to The Street?
TheStreet.com, 1996, the internet revolution was coming. We were getting email addresses, as fascinating as that might sound, and it took some persuading. I can't say I jumped right away. I felt like, hey, I'm working at the Wall Street Journal. This is the pinnacle, as you called it. It's one of the greatest news organizations in the world, and why would anyone want to leave that for something unproven? And part of me was also thinking I was about 28, I wasn't married, I didn't have things like a mortgage, and if I wasn't willing to take a risk and try something new, try something different, try to experience something that I thought no matter what happened would help advance my career, get in touch with this new technology, which I believe would revolutionize the way news and information was collected, gathered, and disseminated, it was the perfect time. I had to do it, but it took me several months of thinking about it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm leaving. It was a very challenging. And candidly, when I left for the first couple of months, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake.
Really? Why?
Because you go from the Wall Street Journal where you call somebody and you say, hey, I'm from the Wall Street Journal. They don't care if you're Dave Kansas. They answer your phone call. You call and you have to explain where you're from, does it exist, and the phones don't work, the computers are on the fritz, and a startup is everybody doing everything, and not everything is working. There's a lot of a lot of effort just to do the things you took for granted when you worked for a large organization. So it was very eye-opening for me, a great experience. And I was there for 5 years, and I'd say the first 3 were pretty brutal.
Wow.
Pretty brutal.
Now, there's a romanticism now about startups. So
That's
probably
true.
half of our students really want to go into that world where they can make a bigger impact because they don't have all those people above them like you had at the Wall Street Journal. Is it worth it?
It can be. I think if you have to look at, again, is it something you believe in? Is it something you're going to have passion for? I think it's a lot like, not everybody's had a chance to write a book, but if you write a book, you're with that subject matter for a long time and alone with it. And if you don't have much taste for it, it can be a very depressing, dark experience. A startup's a similar thing. You are alone a lot. You are with some people too, but you are kind of fighting to break out. And there's going to be conflict, there's going to be difficulty and challenge. And if you don't love or believe what you're doing, I think it gets really tough to make that work. I think a lot of, 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000 maybe, they come up with an idea and it works perfectly. They work 3 hours a day and they sell it to Google for $1 billion. Doesn't happen all the time, and a lot of great ideas took years to germinate. So, whatever, Colonel Sanders, I think, didn't actually get it right until he was in his mid-60s. So he's toiled for a long time, and we all know what Kentucky Fried Chicken is. So there's a wide range of how it can go, and if you don't really care and you're only thinking about a payout or you're only thinking about a headline, I think you're going to get frustrated pretty quickly.
So at the end of 5 years, what made you make the next leap? Because clearly you did make the decision to take a risk, and it was good enough, a decision. But then the next one, how do you decide?
Well, the internet bubble burst famously about 14, around 2000, 2001. And the company hit hard times, and we had, built this company up, internationally, and we slowly had to dismantle it. And it's very hard to dismantle something you built. So we closed the overseas operations. We cut the staff significantly. And when we were going through another round of big staff reductions, I decided that it was time for me to let somebody else go through the kind of dismantling of some of those things that had been built. And the thing I'm really proud of is that that was necessary work, and I did it as much as I could. Other people did things after me, and the Street.com is still around. It's still a vibrant, intriguing corner of the financial news landscape. And to be able to say you were instrumental and part of a team of groups that built that, and there's a lot of folks who were involved. It's fun to be able to say, yeah, I was involved in that, many years ago, and it's still around. It's easy, it's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. Also, it gives you a lot of layers of opportunity and growth yourself because you bring in the different experience. So the books, you just hinted at that, but you've written a number of books. How did that play in? Did you juggle that at night before you became a dad, or while you had the little ones, where you do it in the middle of the night?
Well, I've written 4 books. The first one I had a lot of help on. It was a combination of Street.com staff that we did. And I'm lucky in that I'm a very fast writer, fast, clear writer. Not everyone is a fast, clear writer. I probably can't write like F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is a shame. My fellow Minnesotan is a much better writer than I'll ever be. But I have the ability to write quickly. So the third book I wrote was a crash history of the end of Wall Street after the 2008 financial crisis. That happened in mid-September. In early October, I got a call from the Wall Street Journal asking if I could write a 40,000-word book in 4 weeks about the crash that had just occurred. They wanted to publish it early in 2009, and I was working full-time at the time, but I was able to do that book on nights and weekends. I remember one weekend I wrote 9,000 words in 2 days, almost a quarter of the book.
That is fast.
So I bruised or sprained my big toe pressing down on the carpet of the hotel room I was in while I was typing. I was pressing so hard. So I felt like if you could do something quickly that explained what had just happened, there would be a fun, great service to readers, and it was translated into a lot of different, Japanese, Korean, German, and of all things for a Minnesotan, Norwegian. I guess the Norskis, my fellow Norskis, wanted to hear about that. So. And
how did that change the course of your career now? Because now you've done radio, and you've done sports, and you've done finance, and you've done startup, and a book. So what did that offer you, or how did you put all that together for next moves, would you say?
Well, I was in a position where I could go into leadership, or I could go back more into writing. I'd been in leadership, I'd been in writing, I'd written books, I'd led news organizations, built them. And I'd been working pretty hard most of my life at that point, and I had just gotten married, and I decided I would take all that experience that I had, and say to my wife, you want to go to graduate school? Pick any town in Europe, and I'll figure out something.
Ah.
So I was lucky that she ended up going to London. So I was able to get a job in London. And while we were in London, we had our first son. And this was in 2010. And we thought about maybe moving back to the Midwest, where I'm from, Minnesota. She's from Chicago. And so that made me think about maybe go down the writing path. You know, you can write from anywhere today. You could write, if you want to be a writer, you could live in Seattle. You could live in Paris, Texas, wherever you want. And so I started to pursue that path, the writing path, after the son was born, with an eye toward getting to a place closer to family and closer to home.
So this is not the typical, you know, what the students are hearing. What's your 5-year plan? Map it out, or be clear in what you want to do. This is, in a way, a journey, and then deciding where your values are.
That's true, and I think I started out with kind of the Stalinist 5-year approach. I was 5 years at the Wall Street Journal. I was 5 years at thestreet.com. I was 5 years back at the Wall Street Journal. I did a little startup, and then I went back to the Journal. I think you know, through the course, if you're fortunate enough to have some things that work, you discover what makes you excited, what makes you happy, and your values play a big role, I think, in how that gets determined. Your family life. You know, a lot of my career was single. I was just, you know, mainly working all the time. And I think it's also, you know, taking risks and testing what gets you excited. So I went down. I told you I went down this writing path, and it was a great opportunity. As a chief markets commentator for the Wall Street Journal, it was a wonderful perch. But I really felt that in my heart I was a leader, and that I needed to be in a leadership role. And writing was lovely, and I liked it, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't fulfill me in the way that leadership did. And so when the opportunity to be a leader arose at American Public Media, combining the news, new technology, even cultural interests of mine, being in the area where I grew up and near my wife's family, it was almost hard to believe that all those things vectored in together at the same place, but they did.
And that's what really brought you here today, because you've had just not one career, a number, and we're brought in to talk about sort of the ethical dimensions of the news business. And so we make that a core course here at the school, because we feel that whether you're in public relations or in advertising or in journalism on any platform, you're going to be really facing dilemmas at times. What is the story or the idea that you wanted to share with the students when they asked you to come in and be a lecturer here in our ethics class?
Well, there are a number of things I wanted to talk to them about. I wanted to talk to them about my own experiences in terms of ethical pressures that occur behind the scenes and the subtle influences that power players try to use to shape and make the news go the way they would like it to go. Just to share some of that, how that happens out there in the real world, however you want to define it. And there were also more practically important ethical issues around, for instance, thestreet.com, a company that I had the opportunity to build with some other people. We had some complicating factors. One of the big funders of thestreet.com at the time, a guy named Jim Cramer, ran a hedge fund, and we had to set up the right rules and policies so that the perception of thestreet.com would be that it was an objective journalistic operation and not some kind of arm of a hedge fund. And Jim Cramer understood this, we understood this, and it goes to the heart of an ethical issue. Everyone I worked with was ethical and honest. I believe that to my core, but it was the perception issue that you had to deal with. How could we persuade and convince those on the outside that that was true? And so we set strict policies. Nobody could own any stock, strict policies about how Cramer couldn't communicate and couldn't physically be in the building where the news operation was. We set all these tough rules. We went further than the Wall Street Journal, went further than the New York Times. We felt we had to push the bar out, because not only were we dealing with issues around the ownership, but it's hard to believe, but back in the mid-90s, there were questions about the internet itself, that somehow it was a corrupting influence, and that if you see movies from back in that time, you'll hear people say very seriously, well, I'm not sure anything on that thing is true. Even though the New York Times was just a way to read things, but people hadn't comprehended yet how that technology worked. So we were under kind of pressure from that as well. And I think we crafted a great policy, and we were strict about it, and we didn't get in trouble. There were people that we competed with who got in trouble because they did not have strong policies, because they did not follow through on what we thought was important. In fact, they would sometimes brag that our policy made us so Puritan that we couldn't really understand how the investment world worked, which I kind of find it slightly humorous in retrospect.
Well, particularly since we've all lived through some pretty unpleasant, more than perception of conflict of interest, clearly, you know, areas where the public interest might have come second to the financial interest. But on that ethical core, you know, it goes to the idea of trust, which always hits me as the key element. Certainly in the news business, you lose that trust with your audience, you know, you're hurting.
Oh, yeah.
But back to the internet, you know, what can you trust on the internet? You can get it all now. So the ethics really is about trust, right? And about the essence of communications.
Yeah, and we intersected trust with the idea of building our relationship with the audience, building our business. We talked frequently about we're building that trust one brick at a time, and one big mistake could shatter the whole wall. And it's very hard to rebuild it, especially if you're a young organization. If you're an old and leathery news organization like the New York Times, you can take a large scandal, a big bruising black eye, but then recover from it because you built up decades and decades of goodwill. We felt like we were out on the knife's edge, that as a brand new news organization, trying to compete with the New York Times, trying to compete with the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, if we didn't get it exactly right on the ethical front, didn't get it exactly right to build the trust, we could never build the brand relationship with our audience that would permit us to break through all that clutter, all that noise, to succeed as a news organization. So it was all interwoven into everything we were trying to achieve and accomplish as a young, new startup organization. And it was fun to think through all these challenges. And I was lucky that I had grown up essentially at the Wall Street Journal, which had gone through a terrible ethical scandal in the mid-1980s involving a journalist selling information that he was writing about. And the result of that was a very rigorous protocol around ethics, annual check-ins, documents signed. And so I had an incredibly strong base upon which to build. If I had come from almost any other news organization, I think it would have been even more challenging. So that was a great benefit to that work.
Make me even more proud that our core course involves ethics. What would you tell that young journalist, the new graduate, who's going to be tested every day in some way or another? What do they need to keep as their true north?
Well, I think you always got to think about the audience, and you always got to think about that you're in service to that audience, whether it's a reader, listener, viewer. And you need to make sure that you're building that trust with the audience by being rigorous and being straightforward and not being duplicitous or deceptive. And I think you also need to bear in mind, and this is something that's become tougher, is that there are people who are not going to like what you do. There are going to be people who, even though you're a good person, are going to want to think bad things about you. And they're going to look for ways to trip you up. And it means you have to be more careful than ever. One of the tests that has been used since before I became a journalist is what if what just happened occurred on the front page of the paper tomorrow? How would you feel about that? And if you feel queasy about that, it probably means you're in some area that needs greater discussion before action is taken. I think that's true today, but there are many more ways than a newspaper now. You know, someone, you could be innocently walking by some political rally, wearing a T-shirt from your work, and someone takes a picture and implies that you're somehow engaged in this partisan activity in an attempt to color perceptions of you. I just think there's a little more nefariousness out there sometimes, and I think it's great that this is a core subject for the journalism students here, because I think it will be really important to the success of careers that you have a real strong handle, not only in your own ethical center, but how others could use perception to try to chill the work that you're trying to do.
As the dean, obviously, I'm really proud of journalism as a pursuit, even though it has changed so much. Some people wonder, are there jobs anymore? I don't, because it seems to me it's a training for many different opportunities. You could go different avenues. And you've taken many different avenues. You didn't major in one or the other. You've done it all already. Do you think students need to be, I'm going to use the superficial and jack of all trades, or do you think they need to go deep on one of a platform or another? You know, in this era of 2013, what do you think the students need to know most? Subject knowledge, platforms, clear writing, clear thinking, all?
Those are, I don't think anything is everything has a degree of importance. I think that what works, what worked before email, what will work after whatever comes next, is rigorous reporting and great storytelling. The ability to tell a story, whether it's on radio or in text, the ability to be clear in how you tell that story is always going to be valuable. The fact is that there are more journalism jobs now than there have ever been. More news is being consumed per individual than in history. Some of business side people like me are struggling with how to make all that math work, but the fact is that, I got a call from a kid recently looking for a job in New York. I don't live in New York anymore, but off the top of my head, I could think of 24 places that were hiring entry-level folks trying to get in to the new startup they were doing, wire service they were operating, what have you. When I came out of college, there were a couple of newspapers, there were 3 or 4 wire services, maybe radio. That was it. It had been static for decades. So there is this incredible amount of opportunity out there, and the problem that students have is a lot of their parents are stuck on the idea that newspapers are dying or dead, and that's just not the only vehicle for those skills and talents. I believe that you can learn subject matter. If you're going to be a great journalist, you're going to have to learn things, not only the tools of your trade, but the things that you cover. You're not going to be able to be expert in everything you come across. When I talk to students, I don't think I'm that old, but I talk about the tools of my trade 15 years ago. They included a pager for text messaging. They included a Palm Pilot for calendaring and meetings. They included a phone that didn't take pictures. None of those things existed when I was in college 10 years before that, and they're all quite different 10 years after that, and that's going to be true 10 years from now. So the ability to be facile with developing technology is important. Great storytelling trumps it all, and you're always going to have to keep learning.
And that's why I'm proud to be head of a school of journalism that teaches both ethics and some deep reporting and public relations and advertising, by the way. So, Dave Kansas, it's been terrific. Thanks very much for your time.
You bet. Thank you.